Welcome to the Daily Objective, day 36 of the war in Israel. We are here at Ayn Rand Center, UK. We talk about UK related stuff as well, and UK related stuff in the context of this war. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm joined by Morgan Carter. We're going to get to our topic in a second. Let me just give a few updates on what's going on at the moment. So uh, there's a there have been sirens about because Israel thinks there's drones flying in from both the north and Gaza. Now those are not easy to detect as you would suspect, so they're not certain about it. But this is another one of those things that keeps happening, especially with the north, where Israel isn't really acting. So, as we've said on this show in the past, it is Hezbollah's decision if to escalate, how much to escalate, and they and how they escalate it is something. If they so choose, we will find out once they do it, like we did with Hamas. Israel still isn't learning its lesson from October 7th. The defense secretary in Israel defense minister did say, we can do in Beirut what we are doing in Gaza. But as we've seen, those are uh, words. I now see that there's uh, just now news that five more Israeli soldiers died in Gaza. Uh, all right, so let's go to our topic today. Now, the topic of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is, of course, not a new thing. It was very much in the news with Jeremy Corbyn, who is a full-on anti-Semite, has dedicated much of his life to supporting not just people who kill Jews, but particularly them, but supporting basically every tyrant or wannabe tyrant in anywhere in the world. And of course, he was a wannabe tyrant himself. It just didn't work out because he didn't get elected. Those of you who have been following our work from pre YouTube, although we were on YouTube at the time, but weren't as active as we are now, will maybe remember that in 2019, right before the election, we did a one-day conference basically about the possibility of a Jeremy Corbyn-led government. It was titled "A Socialist Britain: What Are We In For?" And the first session of that conference was a talk by Yaron Brook, which he has given in the past as well, titled Anti-Semitism and Anti-Capitalism, or the other way around. I don't remember which way it is, but you can find that talk on ARI's YouTube channel. That was, and I think on Yaron's as well. That was an ARI sponsored event. So yeah, this is nothing new, but now because the leader isn't is on board with the hatred of Jews and particularly of Israel as the previous one, but the party is still the party of the previous leader in so many ways. There's now turmoil within the Labour Party in the UK. Some people have left. Probably others will follow and start their own party where being a socialist who wants the Jews exterminated is more acceptable than it is in Labour Party. Now we could you could be confused by this and think, well, is the Labour leader actually pro-Israel? No, he just isn't as keen to call for a ceasefire right after Hamas's massacre and before Israel has done any significant damage to Hamas. But of course, we see opinion in the West among Western leaders shifting as we knew it would in the favor of Hamas. French President Macron already said yesterday Israel needs to stop killing babies and women. So and of course the Labor anti-Semites are unhappy with the fact that the French president is saying that while their leader isn't. Morgan, your thoughts on the situation in labor at the moment and what that means for the future and for next year's general election, where labor is the heavy favorite to win.
Yeah. And of course, it's secretly supported by our own dear Razi here. Maybe he's changed his mind, who knows? But so Labour has had an ongoing problem with anti-Semitism for quite a while now. And it's been bubbling underneath the surface. And then every few years, there's a kind of peak where it'll spew out and get into the news, and they'll really clamp down on it hard. So I think it's been there for a long time, but as you kind of mentioned, it came to the fore majorly when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. Corbyn was elected leader. It would have been back in, I guess, 2015, and then maybe it was early 2016, around about then. But periodically over the next few years, what we saw was scandals about this coming out, and in particular, one of them, which I've just sent to Daniel to show an image of. I don't know if you've got it there, Daniel. Involved a piece of graffiti, which Corbyn defended. It's not come up on my screen just yet, but there you go. So if people can't quite tell what that is, that's a piece of graffiti on a wall. There's the pyramid of the all-seeing eye in the background, and then what are sat around a table playing Monopoly as a bunch of kind of stereotypically depicted Jewish financiers who are resting the Monopoly board on the backs of kind of, I guess, the common people who are all naked and are clearly kind of enslaved to some degree. So this art was about to be taken down and has since been taken down. And back in 2012, Corbyn tweeted in support of this, and he basically told the artist that he shouldn't be embarrassed about this because he's in a noble line of great art which was tried to be snuffed out by the capitalists. And he referenced a piece of art that Rockefeller wanted taken down as well. And this got Corbyn into a lot of trouble because obviously, if you look at that image, it's very clearly an anti-Semitic depiction, and on the level that if that were a piece of art that was on display in Nazi Germany, I don't think you would blink twice at it. And so people obviously wondered, how on earth did the Labour leader not see an issue with this image? He initially tried to say he supported it on free speech grounds, not a principle he's particularly dear to in other circumstances, and then retracted that because that was unpopular with the country at large. But very clearly, Corbyn saw that mural and didn't see that it was enough of a problem to just stay away from it. Even if he agreed with something it was saying, he didn't think that there was something enough wrong with it that it's a kind of PR nightmare, so he should stay away from it. And that kind of kindled the controversy about anti-Semitism in Labour, and as part of this, there was an investigation in 2016 headed by Chami Chakrabarti, who's a Labour peer in the House of Lords and used to be the director of Liberty, which is a pro-freedom pressure group in the UK, into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And if you go read that report, what she reported was that anti-Semitism was a problem in Labour. She tried to kind of ameliorate it and gloss over it a little bit by saying it reflects a broader problem in British society overall, which I think is actually true. If we look at what's been going on just today, with 300,000 people marching in London, I don't think that's false. But she's broadly, and she was also saying that it's a problem in the Conservative Party as well, which is true, and which I have some anecdotes about as well. But she found that there was an anti-Semitism problem in Labour after an extensive investigation, access to private messages, interviews with MPs, and she recommended a number of things to kind of try and improve the situation, to reduce anti-Semitism in Labour. But basically, it was a PR job. And although they might have implemented some policies here and there, anti-Semitism remained a big problem in Labour, notably in connection, obviously, to Labour's position around Hamas and Palestine. Corbyn, of course, once referred to Hamas as our friends. He once hosted an event with leaders from Hamas and referred to them as our friends from Hamas. So even if the way anti-Semitism manifests amongst the mainstream of the Labour Party, and Labour, of course, thinks of itself as the party which is anti-prejudice, anti-bigotry, and so on, isn't the kind of strong, consciously held, virulent type of anti-Semitism which you'll find on the fringes, and which does pop up every now and again. clearly there's not enough of a kind of allergy towards it that they view it as unconscionable and they stay away from it. So there's a kind of permissible attitude towards anti-Semitism a lot of the time, and that's what I think what you saw happening with the Jeremy Corbyn supporting that mural. He didn't think it was enough of an issue to stay away from it. And so those are my opening thoughts. I don't know if you have anything to say on that.
Yes, I was just looking on Twitter to see to check something. So the Jeremy Corbyn tweet from, actually, let me just make sure this is true. Yes, the Jeremy Corbyn tweet from October 17th is still up. It says Israeli airstrikes have hit Al Ahli hospital in Gaza. More than 500 people, patients, doctors, and those sheltering have been killed. And he goes on. Now, when while Hamas was slaughtering Israelis in the most brutal and horrific ways, and live streaming themselves on social media, Jeremy Corbyn tweeted basically something, blaming both sides and calling for a ceasefire, which he knows is a one-sided call because Hamas is nobody ever calls for a ceasefire that is aimed at Hamas. A few years ago, I remember him tweeting or posting something on somewhere about Hanukkah, the Jewish holiday, and he tweeted about that, and then he wrote about in that tweet somehow about the plight of the Palestinians, which raises the question, what is it about Hanukkah that makes you think of the Palestinians and how oppressed they are? So yeah, Jeremy Corbyn, it's not just that all everything we just mentioned, and yeah, him calling Hamas and Hezbollah friends, inviting them to parliament, him going to funerals of people whose only claim to fame is the murder of Jews. Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn has a long history of this. Now, this is not something that's unusual. What's unusual is that this guy was almost Prime Minister of the UK. He was the leader of the second biggest party, the main opposition party, and his ideas are still so prevalent in that party that the current leader, who is again on track to become Prime Minister with a landslide victory next year, is he's going to have a hard time keeping his position and running the party because of how full it is of people who basically hate Jews and want to see those who are fighting to exterminate the Jews victorious.
Yeah. Just something I forgot to mention is I agree with you about Starmer, by the way, that I'm not sure what his real personal conviction is about Hamas in Palestine, but what he's come out for is hard against the ceasefire. And what Labour's been doing recently is they've been very seriously positioning themselves for office. So they've been very seriously kind of evaluating their policy positions and considering how ideologically hardline they should be. And there's been a bit of back and forth, for example, about how they should treat private schools, and that's obviously them evaluating to what degree should we promote the kind of egalitarian agenda, and to what degree is the public going to be okay with that. And I view his coming out strong against Hamas, strong against a ceasefire, essentially as him recognizing that the mainstream of the British public aren't going to like that it's too close to being Jeremy Corbyn like. Corbyn, what was notable about him was very much of the kind of intellectual left, university educated, kind of hard left type. And although that might have appealed to young people who are broadly that type, it didn't appeal to the mainstream of the British populace. And when, after his first election as leader of the Labour Party, they were celebrating very strongly, but very much they were celebrating that they didn't lose quite as bad as they thought they might. And the people who are serious in Labour about being government recognise that's a problem. So what I think they're trying to do is they're trying to stay as far as they can away from anything that's Corbyn-esque. So supporting a ceasefire, I think they would recognise is too lefty, is not what the kind of centre of the country wants, or or would kind of, it would stink too much of being like Jeremy Corbyn. So I think that's why Starmer's doing that. I had something else to say because of something you said, but it's slipped my mind now. But that's why I view Corbyn to be doing that.
Yeah, and that's something else that's not unique in politics in general, which is you want to become leader of a party, you need to pander to the base. You want to then actually win a general election, you need to pander to the center. So yeah, and of course it raises the question, which has been raised, I believe, on this show, which is how to what extent can Keir Starmer be actually trusted with anything he says? Because we've mentioned before the war, we spoke about the Labour Party a few times, and we mentioned how his policies are definitely nowhere near as left wing on economics as Jeremy Corbyn's are, and with the Conservatives being quite left wing themselves on one or two issues, it actually sounded like they're not as bad. But his party is controlled by the public sector unions, and they are left wing, and his base, as we can see, has many anti-Semites in it. We don't know the percentage because I don't think they would answer it in a poll. But yeah, so he has a problem there. I think the party. I don't know. I don't know if to say the party has a problem because the party, this is what they are. I think they're more consistent with a Jeremy Corbyn as a leader and with them pretending a bit less. But yeah, as somebody who lives in the UK, this is it is scary.
So it's an interesting question I want to ask you. Really, is how's your experience with the degree of anti-Semitism in British society been since you've moved here? Just because historically, I don't know if people know this, especially most of our viewers are from outside the UK. Britain has had, an anti-Semitism problem. I think you might put it that way. Jews at one point in British history, although it was many centuries ago, were completely expelled from the country and weren't let back in, I think, until it was post-Elizabethan period. And if you look then at Shakespeare's plays or the plays of the Elizabethan period, you've got The Merchant of Venice, which, although there's a kind of sympathy towards the Shylock character, there's an awful lot of anti-Semitism contained in that play. And then if you look at Christopher Marlowe, the Jew of Malta, his character Barabbas is even more of an anti-Semitic stereotype. And then as you kind of go into the 19th century, you see the prime minister, whose name's escaping me now, Benjamin Disraeli, become prime minister. And he was actually Christian, but he was from a Jewish background. And when he was standing to be MP, members of the public and his opponents would put a piece of pork on a stick and dangle it in front of his face and say, Jew, Jew, and try and make fun of him. And he did manage to become prime minister, but that, with a lot of prejudice against him. So it's obviously something which is to a lower degree today amongst, I think, the mainstream of British society, but it's a kind of peculiar disease of the British aristocratic class and intellectual class, in effect, that it kind of bubbles underneath the surface and is kind of there. And it's hard to get it every now and again, except when it bursts out in examples like Jeremy Corbyn. But my ultimate question: what's your judgment of it? Do you think it's widespread? Do you think it's on the fringes, or how do you view it?
So first of all, I do think it's widespread. I can't compare it to the Israelis' time, but it's different in nature in that they don't shout, they don't shout at Jews, as such. They claim to be pro-Palestine, which is now the safe way to express your anti-Semitism. So yeah, look, right now, I think it's right now in London, right, or maybe it was earlier that. I don't know how many of these people lie about numbers, but I guess tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pro-Hamas protesters are out in the street, chanting from the river to the sea, which is a call to, exterminate the Jews in Israel, whatever excuses these people might make for it. And yeah, so that's scary. I mean, me personally, somebody told me when this started, you have nothing to worry about because you look like a Muslim. So I don't know, I don't know to what extent
Is
that's
that because of your
true.
hijab that you wear every day, or
I don't know. It's because of my skin color and facial hair, I guess. But yeah, so I am not, directly targeted, but uh a friend of mine, I don't know if he wants this mentioned, although he may have actually mentioned it himself, but I'll keep his name out of it just in case. He was walking down the street in London a few weeks ago, and he's not from a Jewish background, and but he has a beard, and he wore a top hat that is similar to what some religious Jews wear. And he twice in one day had people shouting at him something like "Free Palestine" or something like that. Now, again, free Palestine. You put the word "free" and it sounds really nice, but then what is it? What is it that inspires such a person to shout at somebody because he looks like a Jew? So yes, I think the fact that it's so widespread and the fact that it's so accepted, as in even when there's government ministers saying how they disapprove, it's not. If this was you know uh hundreds of thousands of people, white people, marching and demanding some sort of action be taken against black people, I don't think it'll be difficult for people to see what's wrong with that. But when it's Jews and when they say it's about the state of Israel, it's somehow different. So yeah, it's scary times.
yeah?
Uh,
Um,
yeah.
just to, although I don't want to take the focus off Labour, just to, I guess, hammer home to people that there is a kind of broad problem in British culture of anti-Semitism, and a lot of this anti-Semitism we're seeing at the moment with Labour is connected to one, university educated intellectual types. So there's that kind of strand of it, and there's a history of that which I kind of mentioned goes back about 100, well, a lot, hundreds of years. But in the last 100 years, it was a very common, almost viewed as a kind of eccentric affectation of the British aristocratic class. If you go look at the history of the Mitford family, for example, and their support for Hitler, and then Unity and Diana Mitford involvement with National Socialism. Diana, who then went on to marry Oswald Mosley, who was originally a Labour Party government minister before going on to found the British Union of Fascists. There's a lot of kind of upper class kind of holding of anti-Semitic views, which kind of connects to their time in education. So there's that strand of it, and then there's a strand of it which is coming from essentially first and second generation immigrants from Arabian countries, I think, or who are just generally Muslims, who view, I guess, in a tribalistic way, that they should support Palestinians. I suppose that's why they hold that opinion. But even then, if you look at, for example, like the writer Kingsley Amis, who was a very popular British writer who died in the 90s, didn't disguise the fact that he was an anti-Semite. Martin Amis, his son, who just died a few months ago, wrote in his memoirs about the fact that when he was a kid, he would play Scrabble with his dad, and his dad once smirked and spelled out the word "yid" on the Scrabble board, as if it was some terribly funny thing that he'd just done. So this is there's a kind of consistent problem in British society of this that rears its head every now and again. And the way to understand it in the Labour Party of why it's a special problem is that the Labour Party is kind of made up of this historic intellectual type, who 100 years ago, would have been around the Mitford family and the Labour Party of that time. And then also you've got a strong base of members of the Labour Party who are from these kind of immigrant communities where anti-Semitism is a common belief. Immigrants from Arabian countries or Muslim immigrants into the UK generally don't vote Conservative. They're quite conservative communities, but they generally vote Labour. So what you get is a kind of melding of these two groups, and then you have a very strong anti-Semitic undercurrent that lies in the party and which rears its head every now and again. So that's where this kind of, in my view, that's where this anti-Semitism problem in its current iteration is kind of coming from.
Yeah, and I think part of that is also definitely with the issue of Muslim immigrants, and I think that's an issue of multiculturalism. That's something I think we should talk about on a show soon. The way multiculturalism has is basically a form of racism, built-in racism, and you know, most of the opposition to it, unfortunately, sounds a bit racist as well. So we will provide the rational alternative on that, as we try to do on many things. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Gail, for the super chats. We tomorrow we'll be back here at 6 p.m. UK time. We will be talking about UNRWA, the let me tell you the exact United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. They are Hamas collaborators in Gaza, funded by all of us. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about how Israel is starting to, at least diplomatically, or PR-wise, fight the PR war against the UN as well. Israel, is now fighting PR wars. Hopefully it will, fight the actual war better. But yeah, we will, on the PR front, we will help so that Israel can focus on the rest. So we'll see you back here tomorrow. Thank you, Morgan. The Philosophy Forum for Platinum, Reardon Medal, and Midas Mulligan members starts in 2 minutes. Thanks. See you tomorrow.